The inscription is actually a victory stele that actually talks about an Urartian king named Punini who conquers Musasir. We'll see Musasir in a second. So a stele that's actually dedicated to this Urartian expansion and the coalescence of these city-states to counter Assyria to the south. At some of these sites that have been excavated, sites like Altin Tepe, we find, again, connections with Assyrian iconography to the south. You can see here some of the wall paintings from this site at Altin Tepe echo that which we've seen at Assyria. These Apkallu figures, right? These winged geniuses. You often see them referred to as geniuses or genies, who we're familiar with from Nimrud, those fertilizing figures with their bucket and their cone. Again, not just shown in ivories in this Assyrian style, but also right in wall paintings, but quite a bit different, right? They are missing some of the traits and done in a very specific style. We find temples, Urartian temples at places like Altin Tepe. And again, these are very specific and very different. They appear to have been built on a square plan with very thick walls. You can see here there's an inner chamber which is surrounded by an outer fortification wall. And these are very thick. They're very thick walls, about 5 meters in thickness, and may have had actually 4 massive stone towers flanking this sort of inner stele, very inner stele or cella. I'm sorry. This the inside of the temple. It's Friday, forgive me. Straight access, very simple construction. And you can see this massive ashlar masonry, these huge blocks, again, Cyclopean blocks, which we talked about, which would have been a base and then probably with a mud brick superstructure built atop it. It seems, again, that these are fortified sites with these external walls, and probably would have been dedicated to one of these 3 major Urartian gods. The chief god, again, as we said, is a god named Haldi, who's the head of a triad. We have Teshiba, who's a god of storms, and then Shivini, a solar god. So perhaps the gods or goddesses depicted on that gold vessel from Hassanlu. Another temple that we actually see is the temple of Haldi at Musasir. And actually, interestingly, this temple has not been found, but we know that it existed from Assyrian texts and Assyrian depictions. A later Assyrian king by the name of Sargon II, who we'll talk about, writes in depth about his destruction of this temple, the temple of Haldi at Musasir in 714 BCE. And he actually represents it at his palace in Khorsabad. We'll look at this when we get to Sargon next week. But among the things that he says he took there, he says he took 25,000 bronze shields. And we see these shields in his depictions of the temple itself. Just so there's no confusion as to what these things are, you see them from the front, right here, and you see them from the side, these conical shields with a lion's head on the outside. That would have decorated the entire facade of this temple to Haldi at Musasir. And what's more, actually, at the temple at Ayanis near Lake Van, we actually have examples of these bronze shields. You can see here this wide bronze shield, and again, there's the lion's head right on the front of it. So the Assyrians, again, doing a great job of depicting these conquered peoples and specifically the things that they took from them. And we'll talk about that in a bit more depth. And actually 10 of these were excavated at Ayanis and would have decorated the temple there as well. Indeed, the Urartians are well known for their metalworking. We find also these large Urartian bronze cauldrons. Cauldrons that are decorated with bowls, these filials around the outside for helping to move what probably would have been a burning censer. Again, in front of a temple, right? Look at this. We've got, again, depictions of these large bronze vessels sitting in their tripods, and we have the actual vessels themselves from the site. Also, in addition to bulls, we find these other attachments, which are winged women. That's another common attachment. And other bronzes from Urartian sites. This one from, again, Toprakale. Bronzes used for furniture fittings. So bronze legs for tables, thrones, connections, that sort of thing. So Urartian is known for the metalworking skills, also known for their horsemanship, their fortifications, and their military prowess. To the southeast, right, so we've got Urartu here in the north. To the southeast, we see just north of Elam, kind of in between Urartu and Elam. We also see the convergence and emergence of another group of people known as the Ilipi, or the Ilipi kingdom, also in the region of Luristan. So this is modern Luristan. Again, from around 1000 to 650 BCE. And we see them mentioned in Assyrian texts as well, causing problems for the Assyrians. This is a very remote area that's filled with semi-nomadic pastoralists in the central Zagros region of western Iran. And unfortunately, because of extensive looting and the lack of excavations in the region, we know very little about Luristan during this time. But we do know that it was on the Assyrian radar, and for one thing, that also these people in Luristan were horse breeders. So we see a number of items linked to bronze working, and specifically the construction of bridles, bits, and reins for horses. You can see how this would have worked, right? You would have a horse, and this is the bit for controlling the horse, and highly decorated. It would have been on both sides of the horse's mouth. And indeed, we'll see later Assyrian reliefs where they're actually, again, using this material, which would have been easily identifiable as horse bits and reins from Luristan. Probably the horses themselves being raised here. Horses from Urartu and Luristan were praised for being of a quality that the Assyrians had never seen before. So they're getting their horses from these regions too. And it's really, again, these objects done in a very specific style. You can actually see the horse's head here, right, with the nose and kind of coming around. This would have sat on the face of a horse, part of its accoutrement. But also very bizarre bronzes that, again, if you read up on them, they'll tell you they serve a ritual or cultic function, which is a big red flag to say we don't know what they are. But they are very, very unique, as you can see here, really unlike anything that we've seen thus far. These bronzes from Luristan, you can see it's almost totemic with three heads and faces, small arms and legs, maybe would have sat at the end of a scepter or a staff, a cultic object, but one that still draws on some of these Near Eastern motifs. If you look close enough, we have the same sort of focus in terms of symmetry, and the balance between an individual and maybe even a master of the animal's motif, right? With these two, I even want to call them dragons, kind of coming up, these snake kind of figures being held at bay by this central figure. So something, again, that's unique, but draws on the same basic motifs that we've seen across the ancient Near East so far. So again, Luristan, but primarily Urartu, around 780, is this huge thorn in the side of Assyria. And during the reign of Shalmaneser III, as we'll see, Shalmaneser ends up losing a bit of power, and Assyria dips down, allowing a bit of a power vacuum for these empires in the north to rise. What we'll see next week with the emergence of a king named Tiglath-Pileser III, or TP3, as he's affectionately known. Around 745, Tiglath-Pileser takes his armies to the north and actually ends up conquering Urartu, bringing it into the Assyrian sphere, and we'll pick up with him next week. So any questions about any of this material, these objects? Any thoughts on this piece? Love to hear what you think. Okay, all right. Oh yeah.
Kind of looks a little phallic to me, like the top end.
Yeah, actually, I mean, it does, right? And again, if we do think this is cultic in some way, again, linked to fertility, and again, this is a base, right? It would have actually, it has a section that's hollow at the bottom for being, so it could be a standard that would be carried around, a wand even, something that would have been used in a procession. And again, these aren't very big, they're about this big. We have weapons as well too from Luristan. I didn't have any images of them, but wonderful, wonderful axes that look like those Hittite axes, which on one side are an axe and then have the flanges on the other side like this. A similar design is used in Luristan, and they would have been quite deadly. All right. Yeah, okay, so have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next week. What was that?
The bottom half makes me think of a pelvis, like a human skeleton.
It does kind of look like a pelvis, yeah.
Like I can't see what else. It's very difficult.
They're very interesting, and unfortunately, very poorly known. There are a lot of fakes actually that are out on the market too. It's easier to fake bronzes than say vessels.
Is it because the bronze is cheap?
Sorry.
Is it because the bronze is cheap?
Well, I don't know that much about bronze forging in the sense of like making fake ones, but I know that a lot of these show up on the antiquities market because they're found in graves primarily. So they're from looted contexts, and maybe if we had better context, we'd understand their function and symbolism a bit more. But again, being found in graves, again, probably linked to ritual and religion.